right? What did I do there? Something I did wrong. That's not gonna come out right. Something I did wrong. Anybody see anything wrong there? That's all correct, right?
It's just keep moving.
It should have come up 23 of 40. I wonder why it's not. Something, I'll have to rethink that. Because that should have come after. So I'll have to think about why it's not. But if you added the 1740, then we know that his whole is 4040, right? Right?
Yeah.
Because this tells us now they've divided his money into 40 pieces. And it could be that it's not divided into that for, I don't know. I'll have to think about that over the weekend and see why that didn't come out right. There's gotta be a good reason for it. But from what you did figure out, the 1740, if they keep 17 of the 40, the whole is 40 of the 40, right? And they keep 17 of the 40, what's left is 23 of the 40. Okay? Because what you've said here is that for every $40 he makes, they keep 17 for taxes. So if you divided his money into $40, because that's how much they said his total was, right? He could make 18 piles with $40 in each pile. You see what I'm saying? There's 18 of them, 18 40s in there. And you could say, okay, every time he makes $40, I'm gonna take out 17 here for taxes, 17 here, so you're really taking out 17 those 40 times. 17 of the 40 is what you're taking out. And he'd take home 23 of the 40. But the main thing about that problem is realizing that your math doesn't have to be the answer to the question. It's just what you had to do to figure out the answer to the question. You had to figure out what fraction they kept in order then to figure out what fraction he was able to take home, okay? And then number 4 says, how much of Alfredo's salary is withheld each week for federal tax? How are you going to find that out?
By the 5th.
The 5th, right? It says a 5th of his salary is withheld for federal tax, right? So I need to know what is 1/5 of 720. Tell me 2 ways you can find out what's 1/5 of 720.
5 divided by 720. Or 720.
Divide what now?
5 and 720.
Divide 720 by 5. Or I could have multiplied 720 by what? By 1/5. Which still is going to end up dividing 720 by 5. And so how much is withheld for federal tax? 144. Everybody get that?
Yeah.
Okay. Because it's a 5th of it. It says Alfredo spends 1/6 of his take-home pay for food. How much does he spend on food each week? What is his take-home pay?
720.
No, it is not. That's his gross pay.
120.
How are you going to figure out his take-home pay? Divide what?
1/6.
By 23/40. Are you going to not divide it by? You're gonna multiply it by, because you wanna know what is 23/40ths of 720, right? Because that's what he takes home. We figured out he takes home 23/40ths, right? I need to know what is 23/40ths of 720. Now, think about this. You wanna know what is 23/40ths?
Hold on.
Can you tell me how I can figure that out?
23/40ths
Uh-huh.
from 17.
How can I figure out what is 23/40ths of 720?
You 720 divided by 720. Is over of.
We haven't even gotten to that yet, but you could do that.
Oh.
You could say, what is
23.
23/40ths of 720?
Yeah.
You could do that.
Yeah.
But since we haven't gotten to ratio and proportion yet, I don't want to confuse people.
Oh.
If I want to find out of means to multiply. You remember when we said you wanted 1/2 of? We can multiply 1/2 times. Now, if you wanted to divide, here's what you'd have to do. If I divided 720 by 40, I'd find out what is 1/40th of 720. You see what I'm saying? Once I find out what is 1/40th of 720, how can I find out what's 23/40ths of it?
Multiply.
Times it by 23. You see what I mean? 18. That's 1/40th. That's one of the 40. So if I multiply times 23, I can find out 23/40ths of it. Okay? Or I could have said, like I said, 23/40ths times 720. Which, look what you end up doing. Multiplying 720 by 23 and dividing by 40, which is what we did. We just did it backwards. We divided by 40, multiplied it by 23. This is going to have us multiplying 23 times 720. This would be a time you'd want to cancel. You see what I'm saying? I don't want to multiply 23 by a big 720. I know 10 will go into both of those numbers because they both end in 0, you see? So I would say 10 goes in here, 10 goes in here. Now when it gets a little smaller, I say, well, I know 2 will go into it. Because they're both even numbers, right? 2 will go into 4, and 2 will go into 72. I say, oh, 2 will go again, won't it? 2 will go into 2, and 2 will go into 36. And what do I end up doing? Multiplying the 18 by the 23. It all works out. It is kind of funny when you see it. It
is.
all works out to the same. You're still going to end up multiplying the 18 times 23, and you're still going to come up with your 414. If I want to find, 3/5 of a number, I'm going to divide that number by 5 and multiply it by 3. Because I'm going to find what is 1/5 first, and then times 3 would be 3/5. You see, that is the easiest way to find it. If I want to find, yes, that's, they don't have that?
No, they don't have 414.
Well, what did we do?
Huh?
No, that's not the answer.
That's not the answer. Oh,
We were
okay.
finding out what's his take-home pay.
Oh.
You can't find out what is 1/6 of it until you find out what his take-home pay is.
So now you gotta divide that by 6.
Now you divide that by 6 to find out what he spends on food. You see what I'm saying? But the question was there. It says he spends 1/6 of his take-home pay for food. There is nothing in there that told you what his take-home pay was. So how are you going to find 1/6 of it? You had to first find out what is his take-home pay. And the only thing that they told you, and that's the problem-solving part of it, you had to go backwards. Because it said, okay, how am I going to find out his take-home pay? Well, in that question it asked, what fraction of his salary did he take home? you found out that he took home 23/40 of his salary, because you found out that they took out 17/40 of his salary in taxes, right? You see what I'm saying?
That's a lot.
You gotta think about all that.
All the way back up there.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to find out that,
Oh.
if you need to find out, if I say I spend half of my take-home pay, and you know, don't use weird ones, 6 or 7. Half is what everybody relates to. If a question says, Carla spends half of her take-home pay on food, how much does she spend on food? How would you figure it out? Half of her take-home pay she spends on food. What would you need to know to figure that out?
Her take-home pay?
Her take-home pay, right? Same thing. Make it into something that makes sense. If it says a sixth of it, it's the same as if it asks if she spends a half of it. A sixth of it, if she spends a sixth of her take-home pay on food, I need to know what is her take-home pay. So I'm looking back through here and saying, well, what is her take-home pay?
You're right.
It don't tell me that. It tells me her gross pay.
True.
That's when you need to know that vocabulary. You have to know that gross pay is the money that you earn. Net pay is the money that you take home. See, they didn't say gross and net here, but they gave you in the information what his gross pay was. Then they ask you, how much does he take home?